I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I need.
Marriage is the best. Hey, welcome back to Marriage is the Best. Last week we were talking about what development is, and we discussed how development is the process of growing and learning across time that leads to maturity, mastery, or competence. And for now, I'm happy with that idea of development. I think that it captures a bunch of the different elements that need to be acknowledged as we talk through marital development, right? It's a process, first and foremost, that there's growing and learning that needs to take place, that takes place across time, and that we're hoping that will lead to maturity, mastery, or competence. Really kind of all three, right? Competence is more of the idea of understanding and engaging and gaining the skills necessary in order to have a successful marriage. Maturity is the idea of is the idea of deepening one's emotional and psychological knowledge, understanding, and applied wisdom. What is maturity? Man, that's a really good question. When I think about maturity, I guess what I'm thinking about is mostly like emotional maturity. And I think that there's a connection between emotional maturity and relational maturity. So if you were to learn and grow across time and become more mature, your responses change. You know, when I was a 21-year-old getting married and a 22-year-old becoming a father, my responses were pretty poor. They were poor toward my wife at times. They were poor toward my kids at times. There was a lot of immaturity in that season in all regards, from a relational standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a financial standpoint, like tons of immaturity in that season. And now I talk to 21 and 22 and 23-year-olds, and I just have to remind myself that I was taking on the world at that point, you know, with like one or two or three kids along my path during that season. So maturity, I guess I would say, is, as I'm thinking about it, is kind of updating your ability to respond in your relationship in healthier and healthier ways. I like that. I like the idea of maturity connected to our ability to respond well, our ability to have self-control. You know, I've got a few couples, maybe even right now, who early on in the relationship, there was an immaturity around alcohol use. And as the individuals in the marriage grew and as the marriage relationship grew, that dependence and insistence around alcohol faded and was moved out of a place of influence in their relationship. And they were able to move beyond the call to alcohol in their lives and move into higher levels of accountability and responsibility and health. And I think maturity maybe is one's, moving into increased accountability, responsibility, and health. Early on in all of our relationships, there is a lack of maturity, a lack of relational maturity. And so to develop from a marital standpoint means growing in our maturity so that we can face each of the stages and overcome each of the tasks and develop each of the skills involved in the different stages of marital development. And one of the things that has us do that is our maturity. And one of the things that might get in the way of our marriage going from one stage of development into the next stage of development is a lack of maturity. Because if we don't engage with the process of growing and learning across time, we fail to grow in the areas that we need to. We fail to learn the things that we need to learn. We fail to develop the skills and capacity and ability to face each of the stages. Then our marital development gets stunted, and we can only achieve a certain level of fulfillment and intimacy within our marriage. And just to kind of jump off of the idea before, if these individuals who I've spoken to had not ever moved beyond their affinity for alcohol and their use of alcohol, their marriage was not going to develop very far as a result of them being stuck in a more immature state of being. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that all mature people, all mature people or all mature marriages or all people in general have the same value or the same priority, or they exercise alcohol in the same way. Like their relationship with alcohol doesn't have to look the exact same way as all these other people. But an immature relationship with alcohol will hijack your ability to grow as an emotional person, as a spiritual person, as a relational person, as an emotional person. If I said it twice, it's probably for emphasis. And so, therefore, it's important to look at a lot of the things that can kind of keep us stunted in our growth as individuals, as well as things that can keep us stunted in our growth within our marriages. So we've got this idea of development, and now we've got this idea of stages of marital development. And we're going to be talking about stage 1, or the honeymoon phase. Honeymoon is one of those things you can find in culture and music. You can find it in lots of books. You can find it in romance novels. You can find it in rom-coms. There's a whole heap of media that kind of lives off and, really capitalizes on this idea of the honeymoon. Kind of early infatuation, early passion, early love, falling in love with one person when you're not really in love with the other person, and the sparks and the music and the camera turning around in circles. There's a ton of media and there's a ton of stories that represent moments in the honeymoon phase of a relationship that kind of dominate culture. I might just go as far as to say that almost all cultural stories live in the honeymoon phase of relationships. And there aren't that many wonderful stories about relationships that stand the test of time, or that grow and mature over time, or kind of represent more of a developmental pattern rather than sparks flying and the fire, getting out of control, or, these different kind of tropes that you'll find in relationships and in media. Now, there are probably plenty of stories that I'm just unaware of that do a good job of capturing kind of marital development or relational development. But I guess I would, from my experience, I should specifically say, from my experience, I would say that the majority of stories that get airtime and that are invested in, or like in, that are portrayed in the media, either have really a focus on the honeymoon phase or a focus on immaturity in a relationship, or just an unhealthy relationship in general. The honeymoon phase of a relationship is not just a trope that you'll find. It is something kind of well established and understood as consistent and well represented even across culture. It's one of those things that you're going to find pretty much in all the honeymoon phase of a relationship is an important phase and is a bit of a dangerous phase early on in the way that a marriage will develop out of the honeymoon. So you can characterize the honeymoon phase of a relationship in kind of these 5 different areas, right? So there's an intense attraction or a fast infatuation, heightened emotional closeness, strong sexual desire, an idealization of the partner, seeing them in a very positive light, an ideal light, and reduced perception of flaws or incompatibilities. When I think back on Rebecca and my experience of our relationship, I definitely feel and see an incredibly intense attraction, really strong sexual desires, heightened emotional closeness, the idealization for sure, and then the reduced perception of flaws or incompatibilities. Now that one is a little questionable for Rebecca because she doesn't have any flaws or incompatibilities, but these other ones for sure were a part of our early phase of relationship. And I think a lot of people will resonate with most of, if not all, of those as they think back, if they can remember back to that really intense first few months up to maybe even 1 or 2, the first 2 years. Some of the things that characterized mine and Becca's honeymoon stage would be, staying up super duper late, chatting, being able to have 4 to 6 hour conversations and not feel bored and not feel like time was a thing. Being kind of obsessive in our thoughts and desires for one another. The heightened emotional closeness leading to a lack of health and a lack of, ability to kind of see oneself as separate. I think I failed to differentiate myself from Becca for a very long time because I was caught up in the early stage of our relationship, I was completely caught up in who this other person was and how it felt to not be with them and how all I wanted was to be with them. And when I was with them, all of the intense attraction, infatuation, desire would come out. And it was very much like drugs. I would imagine it would be very much like drugs. And so, yeah, there's an intensity to it. It's interesting. I found as I was doing research on the honeymoon phase of relationship, I found that researchers often compare the brain state of like living in a honeymoon phase, and they compare it to a mild, non-pathological, altered state of consciousness. A mild, non-pathological, altered state of consciousness. So it's basically changing your brain. And it does actually change your brain, like the actual neuroscience, the actual idea that my brain is different. When they looked at brain scans, they can see increased activity in the dopamine reward system, and they can measure elevated levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and PEA. I don't even know if I want to try and say this, but it's phenylethylamine, something like that, which I guess is referred to as the love chemical. And then reduced activity in areas linked to critical judgment and fear. So all of that serves to explain why there's such emotional highs, why flaws feel so small or almost invisible early on, and why our brains are obsessive about the other person, because the brain is genuinely on a high of chemical, and within a non-pathological altered state of consciousness. So our brains aren't really functioning in the same way, or in the way that they normally would. And, it feels really good and really bad, and it feels crazy at times. And I think this is part of the reason that, like, the idea that love is blind is a thing, is because within the neuroscience and within the brain mapping and the experience of this honeymoon phase, it definitely feels like you are blinded by the experience of the honeymoon phase, by this passionate honeymoon time. And it's very difficult to see clearly who this person is, what this person is, and what this relationship turns into. Now, the honeymoon phase is actually a really important phase of relationship. And you could take a lot of the things that I've said today as maybe like negative things or bad things that you find within the honeymoon phase. But ultimately, the reason that the honeymoon phase is a thing is the honeymoon phase serves as a purpose to drive us to commit to our partners. It drives us to invest in our relationships. It drives us to overcome early obstacles, and it drives us to create a bond, deep, intimate bond with our romantic partners. And those are good things. Commitment formation is really good. Motivation to invest is really good. Overcome early obstacles, things that might shut that relationship down early on. And the bonding, that intimacy, that bonding over time, all of those things serve as a really good, healthy purpose in establishing an early foundation for relationship. So when I talk to couples about their early relationship foundation and what drove them to one another, it's oftentimes an indicator for like where their marriage is at and where their relationship is at currently. So if I ask, how did you guys meet and what was that like for you? And they go off on a story about their early lives together, and they laugh or they smile or they give an affectionate touch. They have memories to share. They work together in producing the story. All of those things serve as anchor points for me as a counselor to kind of hear and absorb and listen to and understand where they're coming from and how they maybe think about each other right now and how they think about each other back then. And if there's a big difference, I used to, think she was cool, and now I am just only annoyed by her, or vice versa. And it is an important kind of data point to understand how their early phase of relationship is currently being thought about and how it has impacted where they are right now. Oftentimes, the issues that a couple is facing was they were present in the early phase of the relationship. And so it's very often not new things, almost never is it new things that couples are bringing into counseling to want to work through. It's almost always started either, in the transition from no kids to some kids, or it started right off the bat. And those are the two stories that I hear primarily. And so the issues that you're blind to in a honeymoon phase are issues that very well may stand the test of time and create those unresolvable conflicts that we've talked about, where not that the two people are broken in a certain way, and in coming together, they create holes within the system, and those holes can't be patched or filled. And so what needs to happen is an ability to dialogue in a gracious and gentle way, and to limit defensiveness within that issue so that the dialogue can occur is necessary. Those issues and those unresolvable conflicts oftentimes are present because of the nature of the two people coming together and the holes that they create when matching personality and when matching family of origin and when matching all of the things. They've created this, this natural hole. And so neither of those things are bad, neither the honeymoon phase and being blind to it, nor the holes that are created. Those are natural, marital, functional, systemic occurrences. Those are normal. It's okay. And so when I think about the honeymoon phase and how important it is in creating early attachment, early immature attachment, and how when it fades, when the chemicals start to kind of wear off and reality kind of starts to set in, there are new tasks and new skills that need to be developed so that a marriage can be healthy. When I talk to people in dating relationships who are good matches and have a good base for a relationship, meaning that the person that they're dating shares some of their interests, the person that they're dating shares some of their values, there's an attraction, there is similar expressions of future goal orientation. When they tick some of the boxes of, okay, so there's some foundational things going well, so you could maybe work out the differences in some of the other areas, but in these 3 or 4 areas that we're pretty sure there's a higher rate of alignment. And that's what you want to see. You want to see kind of that higher rate of alignment within the relationship, even in the honeymoon phase. So when I'm talking to my couples and to the individuals who are coming in for counseling about those things, I often am encouraging them to just enjoy the honeymoon phase, to enjoy the attraction, to enjoy the desire, to enjoy the commitment, to commit, to lean into it, to continue to pursue, to continue to discuss and have the conversations that need to be had across the time, and to just enjoy, be a little bit crazy so that you can make some memories, because this love is blind kind of crazy season only happens for a short season. So within reason, doing some crazy things in order to kind of solidify and memorialize this season of the relationship can be helpful in remembering how it felt and what it was like to move through this. So Becca and I did some pretty crazy things during our honeymoon phase, and we often talk about those different things. We talk about falling asleep on a Skype call and waking up the next morning to each other. We talk about Thursday nights being our conversational night at college because it was the only night that we both had free. And we remember staying up until all the wee hours of the night in the coffee shop at Crown College And then, you know, me walking her back to her dorm and then going up to Faith. And we talk about, you know, dates that we had that were just ridiculous. We talk about different, you know, expressions of passion and desire that occurred during that season and how ridiculous we were as human beings, how absolutely ridiculous we were. We talk about those things. We remember those things. We think back fondly on those things, and we remind each other of those early passions and desires and expressions. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to kind of hold on to some of that and to bring it out in our relationship, to bring it forward in our relationship as we move through the goods and the bads and the uglies and the ups and the downs and the stress and the parenting and all of that. That reminds us of a season where we were very underdeveloped, where we were just passion and hormone and all of those things. And we weren't necessarily, you know, logic and responsibility and accountability and reasonable living. And so you don't want to stay in the honeymoon phase, nor can you. It's impossible to do so. Your body would run out of chemical probably, and it would probably break in some way if you try to manufacture that. And there's no way to do it, you know, naturally to like stay in that. But it's also wouldn't be healthy for us as people, for us as a society, for us as you know, moving forward in our lives as individuals. It's not healthy to stay in that it wouldn't be healthy to stay in it the whole relationship. And in fact, we really need to be looking forward toward the next season of relationship, the next stage of relationship, not with trepidation, but with excitement. I don't like that at all. I hate that. Even though the honeymoon phase has its flaws and has its downsides, but it's also really beautiful and foundational in one's experience of their relationship. It also can provide a lot of love moving forward, but it's not enough just in and of itself to create a healthy long-term marriage. You need other things. You need new skills, new seasons and stages of development in order to learn and grow and mature and build the life that is available, build the life that you really want to be building toward increased responsibility and health. And the honeymoon phase does not encourage either of those things. So if you are in a honeymoon phase of relationship, I would say enjoy it to its fullest. Be goofy within reason, and even though you're probably unreasonable, and make some really good, healthy, strong memories. Continue to commit and pursue and ask the right questions. There's lots of books on questions and relationships. It's important to know that the honeymoon season comes to an end, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It could be a painful thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And that moving through a good honeymoon phase and being able to transition into the next stage of relationship that we'll probably talk about next week is going to be really important and really healthy. And knowing that it's normal and knowing that it's natural, I hope will take the edge off of the reality of it. And, you know, for those of you who have been married a long time, I think that it's important to know that the honeymoon phase can still serve a good, healthy purpose for you and your relationship right now if you go back and if you reminisce and if you think about it and think through that. The last couple of weeks, we've talked about the first stage of marriage, which is obviously the honeymoon phase. As I was thinking about kind of stage number 2 and how to kind of transition from honeymoon into whatever we're going to call the second phase of marriage, I was thinking through Becca and my early kind of marital dynamics. And thinking about how much conflict we had early on in our marriage. After the honeymoon highs kind of came down, and the heightened emotions, the heightened chemicals, the heightened passions, and the chaos of our lives started to settle down, and reality started to settle in. We found a lot of conflict and a lot of really, really difficult feelings where the honeymoon phase was chock full of high intensity, really kind of over the top expressions of passion, and kind of as we talked about in the first couple of episodes on the honeymoon, talking about the disconnect from reality. We experienced a very strong disconnect from reality during kind of the height of our honeymoon phase. Rebecca was in Paris, France, on a trip for school, because we were in college at the time. And I can recall her wanting to talk to me really regularly while in Paris, France. And then she even went after her kind of 10-day trip that was scheduled with the school. She actually went and visited some friends and a cousin, and went all over the world or all over Europe. And then her mother actually came, hung out with her for a few days. And throughout that whole season, she was reaching out to me. She was trying to connect with me. We were trying to talk. We were trying to coordinate. And I was living in my friend's mother's basement for some of that trip. And just kind of, it was kind of the dream kind of bachelor setup in the sense of not that many responsibilities. I don't think we were paying to sleep in the basement, because I think we were waiting to get our first apartment. And I don't know if any of us really had jobs. And so we were all just hanging out, playing disc golf, going disc diving. It was a crazy season. And I remember, because of the way that the honeymoon phase hacked my brain specifically, I was just kind of miserable, even though I was living what would look like my best life. I look back on that and I think, what a missed opportunity to just enjoy something crazy. It was a crazy season of life, but the honeymoon, kind of the chemical and the craziness of that honeymoon phase, stole away my ability to see what I had and enjoy what I had and focus on these friends that I had to love on and connect with and go out and be, silly young adults. I think that one of the dangers that we didn't quite talk about in that honeymoon phase is the honeymoon phase, the way that it disconnects us from the reality of our lives, often takes away from whatever is going on at that moment in your life. And so let's say that you're in high school and you're kind of going through this honeymoon phase. You're missing the opportunity. Oftentimes people can miss the opportunity to build same-sex relationships with quality people, to invest in relationships or extracurriculars, or to spend good amounts of time doing good, healthy, balanced kinds of things, because the honeymoon kind of hijacks a lot of that process. Now, and then, let's say you were in college and you were dating somebody in high school, and then you transitioned and it's your freshman year of college and you're still dating, and your time and your energy and your effort isn't being put into the college experience, but is kind of being siphoned away to this other relationship that you had and still have. And it detracts from that season. And so one of the things that I kind of observe around our honeymoon experience, and then many honeymoon experiences that I've talked to or interacted with, is that when this dynamic grabs you, it kind of hijacks the season of life that you're in. And when we think about the chemical impact of the honeymoon phase, the relational impact of the honeymoon phase, the environmental, the sociological kind of, everything that's just going on at that time, it makes a lot of sense that the honeymoon phase would have that kind of level of impact based on the disconnect from reality and all of the heightened feelings. What's interesting to me is that we don't necessarily control whether or not we enter into a honeymoon phase of relationship, whether we're in middle school or high school or early college. And there's not a whole lot that parents can do to like protect their children from entering in that. There was literally nothing that could have been said or done during that season that I could have received that would have kind of led me away from that, at least in my development and where I was. And so it feels to me very much like a very intense process that I'm not sure if you can adjust it. That's actually one of my questions is like, how can you enter into that season of your life? How can you really enter into the honeymoon phase during a healthy season of your life? That's a great question. And then, jumping off of that question, if it's possible to kind of manage entering into the honeymoon phase at the right time, then you could manage to capitalize on all of the experiences around and before and during the honeymoon phase. That would be really just helpful in balancing and creating more well-rounded kind of life and experience. So how do you choose or manage when honeymoon happens? Yeah, okay. Because I know for me, there wasn't anything that anyone could ever have said or done that would have changed it or updated it for me. I was unreachable. I don't know if that was just because I was so immature or I was so locked in on the idea of a spouse, or if there was some deep wounding from my family of origin that kind of created a vulnerability in this area. Because my friends didn't have nearly the same experience that I did, right? So like one of my really good friends didn't really date throughout college, found the girl that he wanted to date, dated the girl that he wanted to date after college, dated her for a reasonable amount of time, pursued her, did all the things. They got married, and now they're going to have their fourth child. Really cool, really wonderful story. Now, it doesn't, just because they have a different story doesn't mean that that their dynamic is like better or worse than mine and Becca's dynamic. And so even though our honeymoon phase hijacked our lives and their honeymoon phase was more balanced and grounded, doesn't necessarily mean that the work has changed that much when it comes to building a healthy marital foundation. I think their foundation was much stronger and healthier when they started than ours was. Actually, in fact, every single one of my friends basically had a much stronger foundation and was in a much better place when they started their marriages than when Becca and I started ours, which is really fascinating to me. That we could start from such a difficult place, stress, baby on the way, no money, 750 square foot apartment, something like that, no AC, broken parents on both sides, broken marital relationships, all throughout the family of origin stuff. And yet we moved from the most chaotic, most nutty honeymoon phase, codependent out the wazoo, into this stage of a disillusion, breaking down the illusion. I think that's probably what disillusionment it means. We moved from that into the disillusionment, and we worked really, really diligently in this second phase to understand conflict management and to build our confidence in each other and in our relationship. In this disillusionment phase, as the chemicals are wearing off, as the highs and the codependence and the intensity was wearing down, we worked really hard at conflict. And for us, what working really, really hard at conflict meant in this stage, which I would qualify as the first 4-ish years of our marriage, was anything that came up within myself or within Becca that we didn't like, that we didn't appreciate, that wasn't healthy, that wasn't good, that was rubbing us the wrong way, that was bothersome, it got airtime. We allowed for lots and lots of hard, difficult conversations during this disillusionment phase, and we didn't allow anything to get swept under the rug to create some nasty mess that was going to have to get cleaned up later on down the road, or worse yet, would create a bitterness between the two of us that would erode our foundation and create lots of distance within our dynamic long term. So we weren't going to allow anything to get stacked up. I was talking to a client just the other day about how early on in our marriage relationship, the way that we dealt with conflict, the way that we learned to conflict was speak it out as early as you notice it, as best as you can, and work through it to resolve it as quickly as you can. The as you cans are really important there, because at different times we were able to work through different levels of conflict in different speeds. You know, we've had conflict that lasted a week. Actually, probably more in the last 3 years. We had conflicts that lasted much longer. But in these first 4 years of the disillusionment phase of our relationship, we had so often we were thrown into conflict that was small, that needed to be resolved very, right away. I can remember going to bed early on in our marriage and being on I think we got this free king bed from somebody. I can't remember who. It was one of Becca's friends. And so we got this massive king bed. The room was so small that you had to skirt around this bed. It was so impractical and ridiculous, but it was free, and we were blessed by it for a little season. I think we actually ended up, anyways, moving forward. So we've got this king bed, and I remember laying on the furthest side of the bed that I possibly could, facing the opposite direction, staring at the wall because I was upset about something. And I remember learning at that time, going through the Gottman training, because I think I was in my internship at that time. And I'm laying and I'm angry and I'm on this far side of this bed. I was as far away from her as I possibly could. And I remember John Gottman's words of turning toward versus turning away. And are you going to allow your marriage to be a place that you are turning away from? Are you going to create a pattern, a habit, a consistent rhythm in your life and in your marriage where you are turning away from Becca? And I thought to myself, no, how dumb, how silly is that? How inappropriate is that? And I'm probably 23, at the time. And so I'm turning toward her, and I turn my body and I get as close as I can to her, and I just snuggle in, and there's this moment of connection. And all of a sudden, the turning away, the thing that I was angry with, that bitter seed, right, that I was watering and wanting to grow within me, it got rooted out. It got plucked out of the ground. So our marriage relationship could stay healthy and stay weeded. And so turning toward her in that moment and wrapping my arms around her, and we probably had a verbal exchange, but I don't really remember that part of it. I simply remember that realization of, am I going to allow whatever conflict we are facing right now to kind of root down and create bitterness, would be one analogy. Or to create this rift, right? To allow the rift to grow as opposed to turning toward her and forcing us back into alignment and connection. So that would be, one way of thinking about this disillusionment idea is, as the illusion wears off, the work begins. So you're no longer connected to your spouse, right? Because of chemicals and heightened chaotic desires and sexuality and all of that. Instead, the work begins to start to say, I chose you then because you're wicked attractive and I'm very into you and you make me laugh and I love it when you laugh and your smile is wonderful. Into, you're pissing me off. You're making me really, really angry now. And I don't know if I want to still choose you, but I'm going to. I still choose you. I'm going to turn toward you. I'm going to continue to choose you, even when it's hard and even when it sucks and even when we seem so distant or so disconnected and even when we're not being physical and we're not being intimate and even when there's this miscommunication or missed expectations, I'm still going to choose you. And the values that we talked about that are kind of foundational in the honeymoon phase to kind of screen into your relationship, those values as you're moving through that. If you're screening in really good values, then there's a really solid foundation to continue to build on. But there's still a lot of work that has to happen within the area of conflict resolution, entering into many, many, many conflicts throughout time, and creating patterns and habits of turning toward your spouse versus allowing those conflicts to create the rifts or the bitter roots or whatever you want to say, that kind of tears down the relationship or it just makes the relationship much more difficult. So the illusion is wearing off, all of those really, really heightened emotions and feelings are coming down. Reality is setting in. The reality of life's pressures and stresses are kind of coming into full view. And where you used to have this break from reality, which was allowing you not to see the hardship and the stress and the difficulty, or was maybe softening it or creating a haze around it. Instead of that, there's an increased clarity in who this person is, in how they operate, in what they're like, in what their quirks are, in all of those things. And in recognizing all of those things and having all of the heightened feelings coming down, it creates kind of there's a bit of a harsh reality that sets in, that my marriage is not a honeymoon. My marriage is not always going to feel the way that it felt in the beginning. My marriage is not always going to be represented by the chaotic, crazy, heightened, passionate moments. And as that reality sets in, we have the task of building up our ability to move through conflict and maintain our connection and continue to choose one another through the difficulties and through the conflicts and through reality coming into the picture and through knowing and recognizing and understanding who this person is. I am going to stay connected to you no matter what. I am going to stay connected to you no matter where our conflict takes us. I am going to stay connected to you regardless of your foibles, regardless of your quirks. I am going to stay connected to you, my spouse, whom I chose. Despite the fact that you now look a little bit different to me, despite the fact that the haze has kind of worn off of the honeymoon phase, despite the fact that my chemicals are different and our relationship is a little bit different and the passion is different and the intimacy is different. Despite all of those things, I still choose you. You're still mine. And I still want to continue to pursue you throughout the next stage and phase of our relationship. So if you can move into and through the disillusionment phase, and you can learn to have all the necessary conflicts, and you can turn toward your spouse, even when it's difficult, and even when like everything in your being wants you to turn away, and even through, acknowledging and understanding that they have all sorts of interesting things about them that you will learn. And even though they are continuing to learn that you have lots of interesting things about you and they're going to continue to learn those things, despite all of that, we're going to continue to choose one another. And that's kind of the task. That's kind of the goal. That's kind of what we need in order to move through the disillusionment phase well, and in order to really lean into your spouse. We have to learn those two things, and those first few years are a really good test of that. Now, how you set up your honeymoon phase and how you move through that is going to determine how the disillusionment runs and how maybe difficult it's going to be. Becca and mine was incredibly difficult, but I am so grateful for the work that we put in those 4 years of feeling all of the awful feelings, of having all of the fights and all of the intense moments, of learning to turn toward one another, of learning to date, even when we were pissed, of learning to turn toward, even when that was the furthest thing from what we wanted, and learning to set expectations and failing. Oh my goodness, so much failure in executing holidays, in, executing time away from each other, in setting up any healthy kind of distance within the relationship, right? Creating our own spaces, which I think actually is going to come into play in the third kind of phase more so, as the illusion wears off and as we're kind of sorting things out because things are getting clearer. Now we're going to be moving forward. So now what if you're married right now and you've been married for a really long time? How does this idea of disillusionment affect you now? Well, I have talked to a lot of couples who are still in the disillusionment phase, even though they are very, very far into their relationship. And I've also talked to a lot of couples who didn't ever have the necessary conflicts throughout the disillusionment phase, and they didn't set the groundwork, they didn't set the foundation of how do we move through conflict, how do we set expectations, how do we understand and commit and choose one another, even when it's really hard. So because there's lots of couples who have been married for a very long time and are still really struggling with this, understanding this phase of relationship, of marriage, and understanding the tasks may help you to understand some of the things that you need to work on when it comes to repairing repairing some of the maybe missed developmental stages or maturation that comes as a result of the disillusionment phase. So what that might look like is, how am I moving through conflict with my spouse How good am I at turning toward them, even when it's really hard, and even when my feelings and my body and my, emotions are wanting me to turn away or run away or allow that bitter root to kind of seed down or root down into my soul? How am I at rooting that up? How am I at repairing my mistakes, of taking ownership, of taking responsibility for the you part? And how am I at pursuing my wife or spouse in general for connection, even in this stage of whatever we're moving through or whatever we're dealing with? All of those things would be really good things to look at, because there may be habits and patterns that you're executing on or moving through that's causing difficulty in your marriage that is actually based on the habits that you set up in this disillusionment phase. As the haze of the honeymoon came down, as reality kind of set in, and the break from reality was broken, now you have, you're going to really see what you have, and what you have is you're going to have to continue to commit to working on this thing with this partner, because you chose them and you're married, and that's that. So we're going to call phase 3 teamwork. As we're thinking about the end of the disillusionment phase and moving into the next phase, kind of an evolvement or a maturity out of it, what we would like to see is that because you worked so diligently on your systems and rhythms of connection in your disillusionment phase, you are finding increased intimacy, increased connection, increased attunement to the reality of who this person is, where your attraction and the fulfillment of your attraction in the early stages of the relationship is based on chemicals and a disconnect from reality. What we would like to see in the teamwork phase is that your attunement and your connection and your attraction and in your relationship is now more based on the reality of who this person is. That you're starting to see their strengths as beautiful and their weaknesses as beautiful parts of them, right? That we're not demonizing or disconnecting from or coming down on our spouses because of their weaknesses. You have a system or a rhythm both of connection and of working through conflict. And so as life and stress bring about challenges, you have a model for moving through challenging things. You know how to talk about intimacy in different seasons because you did the work to understand how to talk about intimacy. You know how to talk about finances when finances get really tight. You're able to communicate about that. You know how to get through all of these different challenges and stresses and work together as a team through the ups and the downs and the difficulties of the different phases of the relationship. The phase 2, the disillusionment phase, sets the tone. It sets you up for success or failure in this phase 3 of teamwork. So if you've done the work, you get to benefit from the work. If you've done the work, if you've had the conversations, if you have said the hard things that needed to be said, hey, I'm uncomfortable with XYZ in your family, and that's making me feel XYZ, and I'm feeling alone in that, and I don't want to feel alone. It feels really crummy in our relationship. That's a conversation you might have in your disillusionment phase as you're getting to know the reality of your partner's family and the dysfunction therein. And then you have that conversation 1, 2, 3, 4 times throughout the disillusionment phase, right? And all of a sudden, that conversation transforms. It transforms from, I don't really understand. I don't really like what you're saying. I don't really want what you're saying to be true because I like my family the way that they are, and that feels judgmental, or that feels bad, or that doesn't feel good to me. You go from that defensive, normal, reasonable kind of defensive response early on in that disillusionment phase to a softening over time. Conversation number 2, conversation number 3, conversation number 4. You start to see, we talk about the Shuka model. If you want to check that one out, the Shuka model is seen, heard, understood, known. And so when you hear where your partner is coming from, you see them in that, you understand how the family is impacting them, and you know them deeply in, how they're experiencing things, how they're moving through things, how they're feeling. When you're able to put all of that together and really shuka it, really, really understand it and know it, then all of a sudden your responses change from I'm defensive because my family is really important to me and you are being XYZ, right? Like disrespectful or unreasonable or fill in the blank, whatever we want to label their experience of it, to I'm okay. So you are uncomfortable with Uncle Joe and his expressions of affection or, some of his jokes, and you want me to understand that and know that and not participate in it when he's kind of going down that track. And that would feel loving to you, and that would make you feel seen and heard and understood. And so because I love you and because I'm committed to you and because I want this relationship of ours, this marriage of ours, to grow from phase 2 into phase 3, because I want to mature us from phase 2 into phase 3, I'm willing to accept that influence from you more and more and more. And that's where the teamwork phase kind of comes into play. In the disillusionment phase, you're not really willing to change the things that need to be changed, to see the person, because we interpret it as coming from a place of control or ill will or unreasonability or they'll get over it or I'm not willing to change that. When that boils down, when the phase of that relationship is resolved and you're able to mature and grow into phase 3, you see those things that they say in a completely different light. And your motivation changes from protecting the old, protecting the families, protecting old ways of doing things, protecting your own weaknesses and failures through defensiveness, right? Your spending habits, your lack of, ability to regulate emotions. You're able to see those things because in the disillusionment phase, your partner is constantly rubbing against your rough edges and it doesn't feel good. It feels icky. It feels difficult. It feels overwhelming at times. It'll spark defensiveness. It'll create loneliness and struggle and criticism. That rubbing is normal. And if we allow our partners to kind of rub down those rough edges and smooth those things out or sharpen our dull parts, then what we're able to do is we're able to move from being disillusioned and the breaking down of the reality into teammates, teamwork. You're able to hear each other better. You have a rhythm of connection. You have a rhythm of communication and conflict. Things don't have to go unsaid. Things don't have to go under the rug. They get dealt with. They get addressed. There are mature apologies made, and you start to really flow in your understanding and in your connection to your partner. And the more that you are seen and heard and understood and known in your relationship and in yourself, your growth and knowledge of yourself, the more intimate and close and connected and team-oriented you feel in your relationship. So that is an expression of what happens when you're moving from disillusionment into teamwork the right way. So, what happens when you don't move through the disillusionment phase of the relationship into teamwork the right way? Sometimes I find couples that have found a difficult topic in their disillusionment phase. It gets gridlocked, it gets stuck within their relationship. And then it slowly tears and eats away at the nature of the relationship. When we talk through conflict and we talk through probably defensiveness and shame, and we talked through a lot of the stuff last year throughout 2025, we talked often about the Gottman's discovery of unresolvable conflicts. And an unresolvable conflict, just to refresh your memory, is something that is there at the beginning of the relationship or not necessarily at the beginning of the relationship, but something that is there in the relationship that remains difficult, remains conflicted over the course of the relationship long term. So I've given the example in the past of Becca and my early stuff. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about faithfulness and connection and anxiety and feelings and insecurity. And we talked about those issues. Oh, and then coldness and emotional disconnection, or the way that we were talking about and treating one another. So we have had and do continue to have many conversations around these kind of core concepts, core topics. The reason that they come up is because I am broken in a certain area just as an individual, and my wife is broken in a certain area as an individual. And those broken parts of us, they don't fit together perfectly, like the jagged edges of a vase, right? So if you are a broken vase, half of one, and they are a broken vase, they don't come together perfectly. No relationship has ever done that. Instead, they come together and then there's huge cracks. There's these big cracks, holes in the vase. The vase is still beautiful. The vase is still valuable. The vase is still great. But there are these cracks. The cracks don't change because the cracks are created by you in your nature being you and them in their nature being them. In order to change the cracks, you would have to change who you married. You would have to change the person. And the person is not going to change. Now, certain things aren't necessarily cracks, such as excessive drug use, alcohol use, marijuana use, porn use, other addictions. Those are more behavioral issues and struggles. They're habit formed. They are very difficult to overcome, but they are not a part of who your partner is, in the sense that those are the unresolvable issues. That those in their nature need to be addressed within your partner. If they're struggling with alcoholism, let's say, they need to go and address the alcoholism within them through treatment or through AA or through whatever, in order to understand themselves and get to the bottom of what's going on within that structure that continues to destroy them consistently via that kind of vice. That is not the unresolvable issue that necessarily comes into the marriage, although the flavor of those things could touch some of the unresolvable issues. What I mean to say is that if someone is struggling with an addiction, that is not a marital issue necessarily, although it will become a marital issue and it will obviously impact the marriage. But the issue lives within the individual, and the individual would need to seek, support for that. And then as the individual sought support and got better and healthier, then the marriage could improve and grow and change and move into the next phase, the phase 3, 4, 5. All that to say, there's these unresolvable issues in your vase and in your relationship. And In the disillusionment phase, those unresolvable issues get touched quite often, and it doesn't feel good. It feels really, really icky, really, really awful to touch these issues. And oftentimes people come out of having those conversations and those dialogues around that with a sense of defeat, because they notice that they are not moving the needle. They're not pulling forward. They're not gaining any ground as they're having these conversations. A lot of that really has to do with the nature of the problem being an unresolvable issue, and not necessarily that you or your spouse or partner are, irreparably broken, and that your marriage will never change or grow or phase up in the relationship sense. Like what the Gottmans found was that the couples who are masters of marriage, mature marriages, find a way to talk about the unresolvable issues without getting defensive, without getting critical, with infusing humor and connection, and understanding that these issues are unresolvable issues made up of who your partner is, all in all their glory, their strengths and their weaknesses. And it acknowledges the reality around that so that you can continue to live healthily and intimately, despite the fact that you and your spouse have these unresolvable, deep, difficult dynamics within each of you. I've worked with many couples who have found many different issues that they really struggled to come to terms with. I can think of couples that I've worked with who never established a rhythm of connection around intimacy. They never really talk about it. They didn't never really do the work around it. They just kind of did what they could. They ended up feeling disconnected and far away. They ended up not talking about it when they needed to. And so that kind of created a fading or a rift within the relationship. Now, here's the great thing. If you've done that and you're, mature in your age, but maybe not mature in your phases of your marriage, you have an opportunity today to go back and to have difficult conversations with your spouse and to update your personal response related to that specific topic. So if you're really struggling with, sexual intimacy, and you need to talk to your spouse about that so that you guys can work through the rhythms and the questions and establish an understanding that we can talk about this, that it's okay to talk about this, that we can talk about it so that we can get on the same page. We can talk about it so we can be heard and understood. You can update this over time with consistent, appropriate input. Sometimes that is helpful to seek counseling for, so that you have a distant third party to kind of coach and help you through doing that. Sometimes that is easier for partners because it's been so long, and it might be such a wounded area that you can't necessarily just dive into it. But there is hope in addressing those kinds of issues that have caused trouble and difficulty and pain for you and your spouse over the long run. So when you don't establish a rhythm for talking about difficult marital topics, you give the power to those difficult marital topics to create problems for you moving forward, to create disconnect in your relationship, which creates a difficulty in communicating well, in conflicting well, when you're not feeling connected or not feeling seen and heard and understood and known. That transforms the way that you communicate with your partner, and that makes it very difficult for you to manage the relationship as you grow. If you want to move from disillusionment into teamwork, there are some simple things that will make this better. First and foremost, I would pick up some resources and just do some education for yourself on marriage if you haven't already. If you've done all of them, and I work with couples along the whole spectrum, right? I work with couples who have read all of the things and are still struggling. And I've worked with couples who have read none of the things and are doing fine. And I've worked with everything in between. But if you want to do some psychoeducation, whether it be podcasting or listening, that's great. You can start there. Marriage is a team sport. It really requires both you and your spouse to work on things together. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're actually doing just individual growth and change. Work on yourself, and that's great. If you are so inclined, or if your partner refuses to go to seek some counseling in order to improve and grow and mature your relationship, you can do some of the work just yourself, internally on yourself, to grow and learn and change and become a healthier and healthier human being, so that your part of the relationship can improve. However, improving the marriage relationship requires both people. So if you have a willing spouse who really wants things to get better, they just don't have the tools or they don't have the knowledge, then obviously psychoeducation or counseling, if they're willing, can provide the tools and the knowledge and a rhythm or a system for improving those things over time. If they are not willing, then you can't necessarily attack the marriage, but you can attack what is within you that is impacting the marriage, or just what is within you that needs to grow and be healthy and mature as an individual person. If I were to give you advice, if you're in disillusionment, or you've been married for a very long time and there are these like issues that are really they're keeping you from feeling like you're on a good team, I would highly recommend reaching out. I would highly recommend reaching out to Marriage is the Best podcast. So we have an email, marriageisthebest@yahoo.com. If you could give me the details of what's going on in your relationship, and if you would give me an opportunity, give me a chance to speak into your specific situation with your blessing, it very well may be that many people are struggling with your same struggles and would benefit from you sharing. And so if you feel so inclined, I would really encourage you to write in to break down what you're experiencing, some of your, unresolvable conflict, where it started, maybe some of the phase relationship stuff that you're in right now, what you're noticing, what you're seeing. Every marriage is so unique, and every situation is so nuanced in its variables that it takes a lot to kind of break down and help people to understand the system that they've created and how to make it better. And so if you would give us that opportunity, we would love to help you to understand and break down and figure out a next step for bringing your relationship up a phase, for building that sense of teamwork into your relationship. And I think next week we're probably going to talk about kids, or we're going to go dive deeper into teamwork. We've kind of been doing a talk about the phase and then talk deeper about the phase rhythm. If you like that, that's great. I don't know if we'll be able to talk deeper about the phase next time, but we may talk about other related phases. So we might talk about like when children come into play, and some of the difficulties of raising children depending on the phase of the relationship that you're in. Because obviously children can come into honeymoon phase, children can come within the disillusionment phase, children can come into a teamwork phase, and also children create their own dynamics within a marriage and create its own phase within itself. And so there's nuance and all sorts of variables. And so we'll talk a little bit about that probably next time. Today, we're going to talk about the disruption phase of marriage, mainly children. Children are a serious disruption, and disruption does not necessarily mean bad or negative. It simply means that that children come in and they change the nature of the system. If you are living in a honeymoon phase of your relationship, or if you're in the disillusionment phase, or even if you're in the teamwork phase of your relationship, children will come in and disrupt whatever is going on within their relationship. This phase doesn't have a number because it can come into a marriage at any time. It can come into a marriage prior to the marriage even occurring. So there really isn't a number on this one because it all depends on when the children are on their way. And the phase or this disruption kind of phase also runs concurrently with whatever phase you're in. So it can happen during the honeymoon phase, it can happen before, it can happen during any of the other phases that we've talked about, and it can happen during, it also impacts and affects future phases that we'll talk about in the coming weeks. When children present themselves during the honeymoon phase, there is a shortening of that season of life, and I think it very quickly moves you from the honeymoon idea into disillusionment. I think that there is actually a lot of different kinds of disruptions that can shorten your honeymoon phase. Big moments, events, traumas, or big stresses that can come in and kind of cause the honeymoon phase to quickly phase out of your relationship. And so children are no exception. They can definitely come in and shorten that phase. They do change the way that bodies work and feel. Children come in and they change sleep patterns, eating patterns. They can create weight gain. They can create stress. They can create all of the things that kind of disrupt our lives. And they kind of force us to look at ourselves, look at our system, look at the hard things that we're going through, the stress relief that we are seeking, the coping strategies that we have. They take all of those things and they force us to grow up. They force us to mature. It's kind of like a mature or die kind of an idea. When children come into the honeymoon phase, it changes a lot and it changes it quite quickly. So you end up with a much shorter honeymoon phase. Now, I actually don't think that that is wrong or bad, that the honeymoon phase would be kind of cut short by kids. Kids ultimately are a blessing despite the disruption that they create. And growing and learning and maturing is a benefit, even though it is difficult and even though you can put yourself in a position where you're having to learn and grow and change despite yourself, despite your current season, despite your desire. Maybe you don't want to grow, change, learn, mature. They come in and they force that upon us. And for some people, I actually think that happens. And it almost seems like the only way that individual was going to really grow and change and learn was if they were going to have this kind of disruption in life. And that it really makes us better people to be disrupted by children. It makes us, it forces us to look at ourselves. It forces us to turn toward our spouse, or tempts us to turn away from our spouses, which is something that we're going to need to learn to manage within our marriage, no matter what. Lots of temptations to turn away. And if we can weather the disruption of children, we can update our coping strategies, we can update our capacities for mature, healthy decision making, if we can update the way that we're relating to our partner, and if we can kind of use it as an opportunity to turn toward them, we can move more maturely through the ending of the honeymoon phase, through the disillusionment phase, because children create that kind of like an urgent pressure to do so. And children is a lifelong decision, but it's also a seasonal decision. Children themselves bring on many different kinds of seasons. For example, in the infancy season of a child's life, your goal is simply to love and address all the needs of that child from about 0 to 6 months or 0 to a year. The child is always right, and whether it is changing, feeding, or sleep, your job is just to address those little needs and to do it in a way that is safe and, what I mean by that is like creates a sensation of safety in the child, knowing that their needs are going to be met regularly, and with a level of urgency that is able to calm or soothe that child. And then, from 1 to 3, there's eventually there's like this growth of limit setting and boundary testing, and they do it a lot, and it's intensive, and that can create a lot of strain on a marital relationship. Between 6 and 12, 6 and 10, there's this really wonderful season where kids are really coming into their own, and you're noticing personality and different traits that are coming out, and you're noticing their gifts and their abilities and encouraging them in their strengths and creating an environment of it's safe to grow and develop and to fail. And I don't know how Becca and I have struggled at times to encourage some of those things due to, our own things that we carried into that season of life. But we are slowly learning and growing to, create those things for our kids, an environment where they can learn and grow, that they feel safe, they feel loved and wanted, and they're able to be themselves, and they're able to kind of explore and engage in the world. And then you've got this season of marriage or parenting that comes in from, 13 to 18, where you're basically throttling back your influence. They're throttling back your influence. They want to be influenced by peers. They seek that out. And you are having to change your role from infant caregiver to toddler boundary setter to school age cheerleader to kind of backseat, and taking kind of a backseat in their lives so that they can continue to make choices and form themselves, and you're still there and you're still loving and your presence is still needed. But the primary forces of impact are our peers and teachers and others and sports, and really your role just changes very drastically. So throughout all of these disruptions, throughout all of these, like the phases of parenting, marriage is greatly impacted by the different stages that you enter into as you're attempting to parent your children. These different sections of the disruptions that children create in a marriage present different challenges and really require a lot of conversation between spouses to weather each section. So early on in infancy, you're talking about balancing the husband and wife's connection and attachment and an ability to support each other while you're supposed to kind of take care of all of these little needs as quickly and as safely and lovingly as you possibly can. And toddlerhood, there's a lot of limit setting, and so finding the right consequences, finding the right discipline, finding the right rhythms, understanding what needs to be disciplined and what is simply just a developmental season or stage. There's a lot of during school age, there's a lot of trying to figure out how to kind of like continue to pursue the children in who they are and encourage who they are as they're learning and growing. And there's less boundary setting, but it's still happening. And those boundaries that you created in the toddlerhood are now kind of, you're seeing the fruition of that. You're seeing the fruit of that, but you still have plenty of time to continue to create those boundaries. And then as you're kind of throttling back and taking more of a back seat, you're positioned more in the back seat. You're not taking a back seat, but you're positioned more in the back seat rather than, the cheerleader on the sideline. You are trying to figure out kind of like a lot of the big questions. How are we going to respond to the really big emotions? How are we going to respond to puberty? How are we going to respond to dating? How are we going to respond to driving? How are we going to respond to their growing responsibilities? And so there's so many different disruptions across so much time that marriages are challenged to pivot and learn and grow as the children's needs change over time. So children come in and they disrupt the marriage, they disrupt the system, they disrupt all of the things. And we are forced to look at ourselves and to kind of grow and mature. And we are forced to make lots of decisions that many of them will fail. And we're forced to be, have grace for our partners as they fail, grace for ourselves, which is difficult as parents when we are failing. And our relationship is also pressure tested due to the amount of stress and strain and pressure children put on the systems. Ultimately, we need to guard the marital system from the disruption that children create. Not necessarily from the children themselves, but from the disruption. If we were protecting it from children themselves, then not having children would be a great option. And ultimately, I don't think that it is. I think that children actually create so much joy and love and maturity and transformation in people's lives that not having children by choice actually can create other mental health and other related issues and struggles. But the disruption that children create is a serious thing to be contended with. And if we are not really careful in our marriages to guard the marriage from that disruption, then we find ourselves in extremely stressful, difficult scenarios that can very easily wear down a marital relationship. We already talked a little bit about how this disruptive phase affects the honeymoon, how it shortens that down. As I was thinking about disruption within disillusionment, I actually think that is one of the more difficult setups for children entering into the world and entering into a marital system. When children enter into the disillusionment, I actually think it kind of exacerbates whatever disillusionment is there. And if you're not really careful, I think it can create, it being the disruption phase, I think it can create an excessive amount of stress on the marital system, which can lead to people turning away or even turning against their marital relationship. So if you're in your disillusionment phase, and you're finding all of these things that are difficult or stressful within your partner, the honeymoon kind of glaze is wearing off, and you're realizing that this is a real person with real strengths, real weaknesses, and, coping strategies and difficulties of their own. And then the stress of the changes that occur within pregnancy, and then the stress of a lack of sleep and other related challenges come into play. It can be very difficult to stay loving, to stay connected, to want to pursue, to want to do the work that marriage requires during this disruption, and not allow that disruption to kind of steal your loving affection for your partner. If you're having children and this disruption is occurring within your teamwork phase, and you have done a lot of the foundational kind of setting, laying those foundational bricks down already, I think that the phase of children has less of a disruption. The disruption is less measurably, although it is never negligible. If you have grown and matured to a certain point, or even beyond a certain point, and then children come in, the stress testing that children create is less of a disruption. So if you are, pretty secure in your finances, and then children come along, you still have a disruption in your finances. And that disruption in your finances can cause stress and strain depending on how you're moving through that. But it is markedly less than if you don't have any security in your finances and then the disruption comes along. Again, the disruption is not the child, even though it is the child. The disruption is all of the things that come with the child, not themselves. I actually think that's a helpful distinction in our culture, because I think that in our culture, people view children as a disruption, like children themselves. But like our five are not disruptions in and of themselves. They are incredibly beautiful individual blessings. And we are extremely grateful for our ability to have them disrupt our lives, and to have them force us to learn and grow and change. It's a beautiful blessing, even though it is also a great disruption in our lives, and creates a lot of responsibility that we have to then learn to manage, whether we like to manage those responsibilities or not. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a really wonderful thing. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend that people elect to enter into this disruption phase and allow children to teach and grow them as individuals and them inside of their marriage. So the disruption comes, you're in the teamwork phase. You may have to redefine a lot of the roles, and it's definitely not easy. It doesn't create like ease within this disruption. However, it does, the stress and the stress of the season or the phase is different when you are already in that teamwork phase and you've kind of moved through to the disillusionment phase. So a couple things. Children are actually is a kind of a small season in the life of parents, in the life of a marriage. It is actually a finite thing. And it comes in maybe 5 or 6 different forms or seasons itself. but you're going to have to live the marriage out beyond the children. And that is where a lot of marriages struggle, because it's difficult to remain connected and loving and to pursue your partner despite the seasonal disruption that children create. And if you don't kind of continue to pursue each other and date and enjoy and create those rhythms of connection, a system that sustains itself, then you're going to find yourself very much at the end of the disruption cycle or phase, and it's going to have disrupted your marriage. And so a lot of your goals throughout the disruption phase is, how do we stay together? How do we stay connected? And how do we continue to pursue one another so that we don't allow these disruptions to undermine our relationship? You kind of have to guard your marriage against the disruptions. You guard it during infancy by supporting one another, getting rest as much as you possibly can, and taking on your fair share or a large portion of the burden of moving this little one from completely reliant to less completely reliant. You guard your marriage throughout all the different phases of child rearing by staying on the same page, by getting on the same page if you fall off, by pursuing one another, by connecting with one another, and by learning how to do it well, learning how to parent well, learning how to connect with your kids well. You also guard your marriage for the sake of your children, because your marriage is foundational in the way that children will learn and grow and move in the world. And so if you provide them a strong, stable two-parent household, you have provided them the most important thing in their lives that will set the stage for their success in the future. And if we allow the disruptions that children create to tear apart the marriage, not only is that bad for the marriage, but that's also really bad for the children, that those disruptions would be allowed, not by conscious choice, obviously, but allowed nonetheless to create disconnection and to create an undermining of the relationship. Again, that is not the children themselves creating that, but the disruption that children bring. So we guard your marriage from the disruptions by pursuing and connecting, and we guard your marriage for the children because the best thing for them is a strong, healthy marriage. All the previous building blocks, all the previous work that you did in your relationship before this point, before the disruptions come in, are stress tested and pressure tested. And so if you have a really strong value of your spouse and you've continued to pursue them and date them and connect with them and speak with them and enjoy them before the disruptions come, that system of pursuing and connecting and enjoying is pressure tested when children arrive. Are you going to continue? Are you going to continue even when it's really difficult? Are you going to continue even when you're not sleeping? Are you going to continue even when you're stressed or you're upset with how they're parenting or you're not on the same page with sports? Are you going to continue to view your spouse in a loving and a positively oriented way throughout all of the seasons of disruptions that children are going to bring? Finances, we are kind of mentioned already. Obviously, that system is stress tested. It does create a disruption in your finances. Really, finances, I don't think, are a reason to... I don't think that finances are a good reason not to have children. Also, I don't think that there is a season where children won't disrupt your finances. In the past, the value of children was so clearly, like, it was more clearly understood and known. I think that we're running a bit of a social experiment right now where a lot of people are choosing not to enter into the disruption, seeing children as the disruption, and choosing to avoid it or not have it. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that the challenges and the growth that you have available to you is exponentially greater when you do choose to have children. And then there is a large segment of people who are not able to have children. And I think that in and of itself creates a disruption in the marriage. I've actually seen that very gravely impact marriages, the inability to choose children and to have them. And there's a lot of pain and sorrow and grief for those who don't elect to not have children, but who just physically can't. And that creates a disruption in and of itself. And it's not a small one, and it's not a short one. As you watch your friends, as you watch your family, as you watch your nieces and nephews, as you are seeing them grow in their own stages, throughout their own stages, it creates kind of an ongoing ripple effect of, and that's not me, and that's not our story. And it creates a lot of disruption in and of itself. So whether you having children or not having children, I think the disruptions are there. Obviously, they are different in kind and nature, but they're still there. All the other building blocks, you can think of, a bunch of other building blocks that are stress tested when the disruptions come, whether you are really strong in those building blocks or not. I was talking to a couple the other day who built their foundation in a hurricane, figuratively speaking, and it's remarkable how strong and healthy and wonderful they are as people, and that their relationship is. Now, they're still working hard at it, which is a testament to them, and they're really wonderful in the way that they're doing that. But they know how the disruption of children creates an intense level of stress and pressure. And it is possible to build out the foundation during the disruption of job changes and stress and all of the things that life brings, and children as well. It's difficult. It is very difficult. But getting through something like that, having been through something like that, creates a remarkable level of strength and a really positive season to look back on and reflect on. I think builds a lot of resilience in the marriage if you're able to move through those really, really difficult seasons, and that the stress and the pressure of life and the disruptions would, in fact, make you stronger and more mature, and would actually force you to turn toward your spouse rather than tear you down and undermine you. And then obviously during the disruption phase of marriage, you need a lot of really strong rhythms of connection so as to guard and protect your marriage from all of the things. Today we're going to be talking about the fourth phase of marriage, the renegotiation phase. Teamwork phase often occurs in the marital development during children and child rearing years. Now, obviously, not everybody is blessed with that. But typically the teamwork phase is very, child rearing heavy. Renegotiation oftentimes is occurring when a lot of those demands of the children are kind of winding down. Essentially, you've gotten to the point where you have successfully moved through the raising of your kids, and now you're in a season where there's just a lot of change. There's a lot of adjusting to do. So you have to kind of redefine and renegotiate what the relationship is going to look like. Negotiation, or to negotiate, is to discuss something formally in order to reach an agreement. So three kind of primary words there: discuss, obviously we're going to be talking about and negotiating in this season. It's formal. And in this kind of context, formal works really well because I think when I say formal, what I really mean is intentional. So we're intentionally discussing something in order to reach an agreement. And then the agreement part is really important here. Because if you don't agree on kind of where you're going and you don't kind of come to a place of agreement, the negotiations fail. They break down. And all of a sudden, those negotiations will lead to bad places, lead to either a lack of intimacy or a lack of closeness because you were not able to intentionally discuss and come to an agreement about kind of what's next for you guys. And essentially, it gets to a place where a lot of people actually end up ending their marriages. So I was doing some research on kind of the season of marriage, these later years, and I found some interesting things that I wanted to share with you guys. So divorce rates are actually currently at their lowest in about 50 years, which is really cool. That's out of a Pew Research Center study that found that currently around 14.4 divorces per 1,000 married women. And in the early 1980s, there was 22.8, which is where it peaked. So there is less divorce, but there's also quite a bit less marriage going on in our current culture. The gray divorce rate, so people divorcing after 50, has doubled since the 1990s. And for those 65 and older, the divorce rates have nearly tripled than the levels in the 1990s. Now, obviously, the culture has shifted a lot, and the conversations around divorce and divorce just being an acceptable thing has changed drastically. And, whenever we talk about divorce, one of the things that I always like to say and to remind people is that not all divorce is bad. There are lots of instances where couples have stuck together for a very long time. They've stuck together through harmful dynamics, right? Like really, really harmful dynamics. Not like a suck it up buttercup kind of dynamics, but like really serious harm being done from one person to another. They stuck it out for a very long time, and they've found that they're sick of dealing with that, or they just can't take it anymore. They've reached a limit of some sort, and they decide that that's enough, and they're done. Obviously, each specific case needs to be adjudicated appropriately and thought out, within the context of the relationship and the family, and the support levels and all of those things, right? Like that is up to the individual to decide. But the idea is that we should never aim for a 0% divorce rate, because not 0% of marriages are undivorceable, which is probably the worst way of saying that. A better way to say that would be that there's a lot of marriages out there that really ought to end in divorce due to the harm that exists within the relationship. And so we want to keep that in mind as we're looking at these. Also, as I'm talking this through, the like doubling from the 1990s and tripling for the 65 and older, those numbers were probably really low in the 90s. And so I'm imagining that it's probably not a ridiculously high number. But one thing that the Pew Research Center did find is that 40% of divorces occur within the first decade of marriage. Okay. So if you've made it past the first decade, 40%, you've reduced your divorce rate by a lot. That's not how it works, but that's good that you're moving through that. Good. Around 22% of divorce actually happens after 25 years, which is a lot. A fifth of divorces, a little over a fifth of divorces actually occur after 25 years. Now, that 25 years is enough to raise 4 kids. You have them over the course of 7 years, and then, you raise them for 18, and And now you're getting to the end of that 25, 26, 27, 28. And you're entering into the renegotiation phase of marriage. So it's a new phase, and there's a lot of newness in it. And the first and foremost, if you find yourself in the renegotiation phase, if you've been married for 25 plus years and you're, the age that you are, and you've done all this work, one thing I want to say is that you have worked really hard for a really long season, and you deserve a congratulations. You deserve plaudits for the work that you did, for sticking it out, for working really diligently, for not, hitting the easy button and escape button, and for living with the person that you live with for this amount of time. So good for you. Good for you. I'm sure they're wonderful, but really and truly, the relationships that make it this far have worked really hard to get there. And I don't want to minimize any of the work that had been done to move through honeymoon and disillusionment and teamwork, to be disrupted by the children. And hopefully you've used some ultimate, you've created some ultimate dynamics in your relationship by creating sustainability. The ultimate marriage is the marriage that lasts. It's the sustainable one. And so hopefully you've done some things that have sustained it. Obviously you got this far, which is pretty awesome. And you deserve a pat on the back. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So people are entering into this renegotiation stage, right? And the children are leaving. The demand of the children is gone. And I know that most of you probably can't even imagine getting to a place where the demand of your children is no longer there. And I have to give you the cold hard truth. That's coming. It's coming. Like parenting is really a seasonal thing. It's not something that you do forever. It's not something that looks the same even for that long. And, when you have 6 children and you're in your 6th infancy and doing all of that again, it does feel like forever. It does feel like a very long time. Bedtimes can actually feel like an eternity, in fact. But in reality, children and raising children is only a short season in our lives. Becca and I will raise kids for about 28 years. And when we finish at 52, when we finish at 51, we on average will actually have 30, I think it's like 25 more years of marriage. So we're going to have just like a ridiculous amount of marriage to live after the teamwork phase, after, we finish raising our kids. We're going to have a large amount of our marriage to still live. And we're going to need to renegotiate. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've actually brought up a bunch of questions recently that don't make a whole lot of sense in our season, because I've been asking her like, hey, what do you think you want to do in 18 years when number 6 is going to graduate? What do you like? We should plan for that. In 16 years when she doesn't really need you. I mean, obviously she's going to need her mom, but in 16 years when things have changed, what do you want? Do you want your master's? Do you want to go do some counseling? Do you want to, do you like her doing the counseling? I mean, she could go to counseling if she wants to, but the question was aimed at the other interpretation of that. So it seems kind of inappropriate in some ways to be asking those questions, but I've been thinking a lot about this renegotiation phase, and I've been wanting to kind of set us up for success in that, to discuss something intentionally and formally in order to reach an agreement. I want to have those discussions on an ongoing basis so that we can reach agreements about what does it look like to create shared meaning when our children are gone. If I've got the podcast and maybe I've written some words down on a paper and tried to pawn it off on people, and I've got counseling and I've got my male friends and I've got my mentors, I've got all of this fullness and all of these good things that I will continue to want. And then new things that I don't even know. I want her to have equal, if not more, things on her plate that she is excited about, that she wants more than anything, that she that she wants to pour herself into. And I don't want to lose her, and I don't want her to lose herself in this season of parenting. I want her to work really diligently and take responsibility for what we've done and how we've created this beautiful family. But I don't want her to come to a place where this is all that she wants in her life, and that she hasn't thought about what does it look like for her to kind of move into the next season, because it's coming, and it's hard to see, but it's coming. Children make up a huge part of this adjustment, because so much of the need that kids have for our input and our love and our acceptance, for our encouragement and our coaching and all of the phases of parenting. Maybe we'll talk about phases of parenting in the future. But so much of our lives are caught up in, loving and cherishing and building and feeding and wiping and getting these kids to a place where they can take care of themselves and be successful adults. And when that's gone, I think it actually plays, it is a hugely significant shift for especially moms to make. Moms tend to bear the brunt of nurturing because of the way that they're wired and gifted. That's just like a pretty broad generalization, but that is how it goes. And in their nurturing and in their care for their kids, so much of themselves is caught up in that. And that's a good thing. It's good that moms are focused and engaged in that. And what I'm thinking is we want to balance that out, that passion and that love and that nurturing and all of the roles that they're playing, with them being able to be individuals. And so some of the things that we allow, like some of the things that we prioritize for Becca is like time for her. Like how does she spend time for her? Early on in our marriage, she was really bad at it, extremely awful at it. And I had to kind of hound her to get out and do things for herself, such as reaching out and hanging out with friends, or going and getting apps with people, or going out with her sister and chatting and hanging out. And every time she does, it's a huge blessing to her. And it's a blessing to me that it's a blessing to her. And she's able to just like be herself. Can she be herself while also raising children? Yes, that's a part of her, but it's a part. It's not the whole thing. And so she needs time to express herself outside of the context of little people who desperately need and want and love and think she's the world. Number 5 was just like reminding her today that she is his mother, and it was very sweet. And he cherishes, he loves, he is so secure in his connection with his mom, because she works really hard at the connection between the two of them. And obviously she loves him very much. So I think along the way, throughout the first 3 stages of marriage, I think it's important for me to encourage Rebecca to be herself and to want things and to go after things and to schedule things and to make time for that. Because if we fall into kind of a pattern where she isn't doing that, I think that makes the renegotiation phase a little bit more difficult, because the children are gone and she may be left with a lack of sense of self. And in that lack, it can come out in all sorts of different ways. And I've seen it in counseling come out a myriad of different ways. And oftentimes people trying to renegotiate in this season find it really difficult to kind of find a way to dialogue, to discuss, to engage in these hard conversations, because especially when those conversations have not been an ongoing part of the relationship, and especially when the individuality of each of the parents hasn't been able to be expressed or explored along the way for whatever reason. And so the accounts can have run really low. If your account runs really low and you didn't manage it, along the way, if you weren't ultimate in your honeymoon and ultimate in your disillusionment and ultimate in your teamwork, if you did not ultimately adjust to the disruption of children, then ultimate renegotiation, sustainable renegotiation makes it very difficult. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say ultimate in these phases, essentially it's just another term for sustainability throughout all of marriage. And you should check out our other episode talking about the ultimate phase. So these accounts may have gotten pretty low, the account of the relationship, because of investments. A lot of the investments is going elsewhere, right? Managing the household, that's an investment. Managing, a church relationship, managing volunteering, managing money, managing work, managing kids. So you're managing all these things, right? Not just children, but lots of other things as well. And now, all of a sudden, if marriage was not prioritized, which we talked about just last week, if it's not prioritized and it's not full, then the marriage becomes something that is very difficult to fill back up. We got to fill it back up, fill the cup, fill the account. And depending on how low it got, you may need certain courses of action in order to go, to get from where you want, or from where you are to where you want to be. So coming into counseling, coming and seeing me at the good old spot, the counseling care spot, writing in, you could write in questions or whatever on the email thing. That would be good. Reading books, but there's just work to be done, right? To fill the cup back up, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of conversations to have. We have to redefine and renegotiate our roles. We have to redefine and renegotiate our finances. We have to redefine and renegotiate so many things. And so one way to kind of prepare yourself for renegotiating is to keep that account really full so that you have a lot that you can draw on in the relationship so that those conversations go well. And if you do that really well, then you're going to more smoothly enter into and move through the renegotiation. It's not going to be seamless and it's not going to be like easy, right? But you'll be able to move through it and you'll do it well. Here's one of the cool things. Okay. In my research, I actually found that a lot of people, especially women, actually report that in this season of marriage, when the children are leaving, that actually correlates with a higher rate of marital closeness. So marriage might be really strong in the early part where the honeymoon and the early parenting and you're working really hard. It gets a little bit like marital satisfaction. It gets a little bit lower in the middle years, childbearing and rearing and all of that and the stress and, you're early in your financial world, you're early in all of these different things, trying to figure all these things out. And then it ticks back up after children leave because all of a sudden couples can focus more on each other and they don't have so many demands on their time and effort. So the joy, the hope, the really cool part of the renegotiation phase is that a lot of people actually report that marriage and marital satisfaction actually can increase in this season, in this phase. And that is cool. Disillusionment can be a grind. Teamwork can be a grind. Disillusionment is where that 40% of divorces live, right? Not in the honeymoon phase, but in that disillusionment phase as the honeymoon glaze wears off. Teamwork is a grind, right? And the renegotiation phase is actually a really beautiful thing because there's freedom to connect. There's less demands, most likely, unless you've artificially created tons and tons of demands, which would need to be renegotiated, in fact, in this season. And there's just a lot of beauty. There's a lot of beauty in it. And I get excited for people who get this far. I really do. I get excited when I get to talk to people who've been married for this long. And I've had many chances to talk to and work with people who have been married again and are kind of entering into this season of their lives. It's a beautiful thing. And protecting this thing, this investment that you've made, this marital account that you've created with this special person, this beautiful person, this flawed person, is always worth it. As long as there's not abuse or harm going on, it is always worth it. So new dreams. You've got this opportunity to make the best, season of your marriage this season, the renegotiation season, and the seasons that come thereafter. And so you need new dreams. You need to join in with each other. You need to redefine a little bit of yourself, that part of you that was fully demanded by the kids or the other parts of the other seasons. You need to spend some time and redefine yourself a little bit, understanding yourself and knowing yourself and looking at what you want in the future, looking at your responsibilities that you want to take on, looking at, what kind of life you want to build with this partner that you have. And it can be a really beautiful thing. And so my hope is that for you in a renegotiation phase, that you would be able to move through and renegotiate and kind of fall in love again and cherish and join with this person. We have an awesome couple that we very much appreciate. One of the things that Becca and I noticed, and let's just say that Becca noticed it. Let's give credit where credit is due. Let's say that Becca noticed that this couple, who is kind of beyond their renegotiation phase, they've renegotiated and they're doing really well. They join in with what the other person does, even if they don't necessarily value it at the same level. So Becca was painting, and one of her mentor, kind of really a close lady relationship, she decided that she was either asked or decided that she was going to come and help paint our living room. And it was a huge blessing to have them come over. But not only did this lady friend come over, but her husband joined with her, even though this isn't his relationship and it's not his passion and it's not his service, but he joined with his wife and showed up for her. And this important thing, obviously it was important enough for her. And they both showed up and they both worked together and they made it work. And Becca has heard other stories of how these people see each other's values and see each other's, what's important to them, right? See each other's goals and orientation and like where they want to be and what they want to be doing and their dreams. And they honor each other in their dreams. And I think that that's kind of the ultimate goal, because it's a sustainable thing. When you can see your partner's dream and you can join with them in that, and you can balance yourself within that, right? Both parties. So the husband is balancing his wife's dreams and joining with her in that, and maybe even joining her in those dreams in a certain way, right? Finding a way to join with her in that. And the wife does the same thing. The wife joins with the husband, sees his dreams, involves herself in it, encourages and loves and joins him and joins him in doing those things. Because ultimately what you don't want is to have separate dreams that you live out separately that just kind of drive a wedge and make you guys feel kind of further and further apart over time. Really and truly, you want to have some individuality, but also a shared, beautiful dream, something that you guys are both working on and joining in. Even if, her dream isn't your favorite, even if his dream isn't your favorite, within reason, joining with those dreams and finding a way for each of you to dialogue and discuss, how do we come to an agreement, a formal and intentional agreement to negotiate this phase so that we can stay sustainable in this latter part of our life, that we would have that U-shaped, beautiful kind of marital involvement and marital satisfaction curve, and that we would make this phase, this final phase, this kind of end of life phase, end of children rearing phase, one of the best phases that we can have in our marriage. It's really the cherry on top, if you like the cherry on top, which a lot of people don't. So maybe we should come up with a different kind of phrase, but it's that kind of final, like icing on the cake that I don't like icing, whatever it might be on top of the thing that is good. This might be it. This final kind of hurrah, this beautiful kind of end of the tale. And the work that you put in during the other phases of the relationship really cultivate or really kind of come to fruition in this final phase. And you can have a really beautiful, really meaningful, really intimate final phase of your relationship. Today we're going to be talking about another one of our phases. We've been through quite a few of them, the developmental phases of marriage. And we kind of started out after finishing sustainability as kind of a major theme. And now we have done some work. We talked a little bit about what development is in an earlier episode. And then we've been kind of working through some of the phases. The first phase we talked about was the honeymoon phase. It's a very you-focused phase, right? I'm focused on you because you're everything. And so that's a fun phase. And then we move into disillusionment. Disillusionment, I'm going to say, actually is a focus on me, because in fact, I am focused on how you're impacting me and how I feel about you and how I feel about the different kind of strengths and weaknesses that you're showing and how those wonderful things that you do impact me. Disillusionment is kind of a me-focused phase. It's not wrong. None of the phases are necessarily wrong, but it's something to work through and note that it's a phase in over the course of a relationship. Teamwork, if done well, transforms the me phase into a we phase, where your focus and orientation in the marriage is very much focused on the team dynamic, working together, doing things well together, understanding each other, communicating really well, understanding kind of where the team is going and kind of supporting one another in doing that. So it's a we focus. The disruption phase X that we talked about, really focused on the idea of how children impact marriage and disrupt the whole kind of system. It's not a you, it's not a me, it's not a we. It all of a sudden becomes about them. We talked about kind of combating the them in that season of disruption so that you can do that, do the marriage right and do marriage well, despite the fact that it is being disrupted. And we talked about how beautiful those disruptions are and how it's actually a very necessary part of growing and learning and changing as a person. We also talked about how when you are unable to have children, how that also impacts and disrupts the marriage. So we've gone from the you to the me to the we to the them, and today we are going to talk about the you. Today we're going to talk about the marriage phase of sustainability. Now I know what you're thinking. This is a full circle moment on so many levels, and you love it. You love how full circle this is. You, me, we, them, you. And in the life of the podcast, we started with ideas around sustainability, and now we're talking about the phase of sustainability. Isn't that fun? So, when is the sustainable phase? And if there is a sustainable phase, why would it ever not be a sustainable phase? And in my brain, this might not surprise you, but all of the marriage is encapsulated within this phase. Sustainability isn't something that happens after disruption, after teamwork, after disillusionment, after the honeymoon. Sustainability is the thing that makes the marriage last throughout all the phases. Now, we haven't even gone through all the phases, right? There are some later year marital dynamics that we may need to discuss and analyze. But I think sustainability is kind of a fun next step on our journey of exploring the marital development in all the phases. So, when I thought of the word sustainability at first, I actually also thought of a second word. And the second word that came to mind was sacrifice. Marriages are about sacrifice. And when marriages go awry, it is often in an area lacking sacrifice. Now, balancing sustainability and sacrifice is difficult and very nuanced and very unique to your marriage. But the idea of sacrifice is incredibly important when you talk about wanting to create a sustainable system and move through your marriage through all the phases in a sustainable way, the sustainable phase of the marriage. When I thought of this idea of sacrifice, I was thinking about all of the sacrifices that Rebecca and I have made over the course of our marriage. And even more in particular, I've been thinking about the sacrifices that I have made over the course of our marriage. Now, why am I thinking about my sacrifices? Well, mostly because I am me, and so my sacrifices come to mind. And her sacrifices, I'm sure, would come to mind if she were thinking about the same thing. So early on, there was a lot of sacrifices in the areas of like movies, music, and media. Becca had it had a strong effect on Becca. We noticed it early and we noticed it often. And so we had to kind of structure the way that we watched movies and the way that we listened to music and the way that we interacted with media in a way that wouldn't constantly create, just awful feelings in Becca. And it was good and it was hard. And a lot of the ideas around the sacrifice were like, let's make sure that when the way that we watch movies and music and with the way that we interact with social media is a way that we both are comfortable and we're both feeling kind of honored in the way that we're doing it. So there is really nothing to do with control. It kind of sounds like control, but there's really very little to do with control and so much more to do with sustainability. The difference being that both individuals elected to submit to or sacrifice to a standard for acting and reacting that both individuals were agreed that would bless both parties as they moved through their marriage. So there was a good amount of sacrifice early on in that area. And it created a lot more sustainability. If I think back and I think back to if I would have taken an attitude of I'm not willing to give on this area, the amount of destruction that would have had on my wife would be immense. It would be an immense amount of destruction to not sacrifice or be mindful or thoughtful or gracious in the areas that she is sensitive to. Now, that doesn't mean that I've always been thoughtful or that I have always sacrificed. In fact, I haven't. There has been many moments that I have decided to engage in things that I felt were fine and that Becca would have disagreed with or did disagree with. And when that would happen, we would enter into this rhythm of conversation that we both would need to kind of share in order to get on the same page or at least express a level of understanding for where the decision came from, why it was made, whether it was made out of thoughtfulness, whether it was made out of a lack of thoughtfulness. Wherever it came from, we would discuss that. We would discuss the impact that that decision had on the parties, and then we would, get to a place of repair, and we would make a plan for moving forward and engaging and continuing to engage in these different areas where our marriage in particular is sensitive. And it was a very sustainable way of moving through the sacrifices and moving through maybe a lack of sacrifice. Other sacrifice areas I could come up with were, just time, hopes, desires. There's been so many times I can't even count. Literally, I can't even count the number of times that I have been invited by my one brother to go and do something that I have had to say no. And it's kind of painful. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it happens so frequently. It's almost, it's bordering on the ridiculous, really. Recently, I've been able to say yes. Well, I was able to say one time yes, and even in that yes, we balanced time, we balanced effort, we balanced energy, Becca and I. So in saying yes to playing volleyball this winter, not only did we play volleyball, but I also brought the kids anytime that the volleyball was scheduled during a time when they were awake. And so instead of saying, yes, that is for me, I can go ahead and do that, and then creating extra time for Becca to be on the clock in an which is like, it's unsustainable. That's something that, I don't want to be at work all day long and then have my spouse not abandon me, but like let me know that I have to be back at work. That wouldn't be sustainable. I wouldn't be a good counselor either if I was working 13 hours and then had to go back on the clock late at night for another 4 or 5, especially if that happened every week for, 3 or 4 months. So even in the sacrifices in the no's, right? We're making sacrifices for the relationship and to make sure that we're sustained. In the yeses, we're also thinking about sustainability. When we're not sacrificing, we're still sacrificing. We're finding the in-between. We're creating those it's a C word and it means, compromise. There you go. We're creating compromises as we're balancing. Another area where I find that I sacrifice, is in just alone time. Becca doesn't need any alone time when it comes to adult human interaction because she loves people and wants to be around them all the time. And I prefer to recharge by myself or doing something mindless or solo or, just kind of spending some time downtime. She likes that too, but there is a sacrifice in alone time because whenever the two needs in the marriage are opposites, there is room for sacrifice. So I need some time alone. Becca needs some time together. I need to go on a run. Becca needs to sit still. I want to play a game and interact, and Becca wants to chill and watch Netflix. Now, those things can all kind of be altered or, changed. Each kind of element could be represented by the other person. I could want the thing that I said she wanted and vice versa. And we've kind of experienced all of those different combinations over the years. But whenever the needs are kind of faced in the opposite direction, that creates an opportunity for sacrifice and sustainability or woundedness and growing apart. When we choose not to sacrifice and create sustainability, we oftentimes create really difficult things to repair. And repair is one of the things that we're going to talk about later, or maybe just right now, that is incredibly necessary if you want to sustain the marital relationship across all of time. It's one of the dynamics in conflict that reduces the likelihood that bitterness or resentment, which are two of the main marriage killers out there, will not crop up and not root into the system and create cracks in the foundation and kind of destroy the marriage slowly but surely over time. Repair protects you from that, protects you from bitterness, and it protects you from resentment. Repair is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where we both come to the table, we both share our thoughts and feelings about any given topic. We both seek to hear and understand where the other person is coming from. Amends are made when applicable, usually mostly applicable, where apologies are made and ownership is taken, right, over those choices that were made. And then the relationship is able to move on. There's forgiveness available, and, you're able to kind of move from where you are into the next section of time. Sacrifices are a great opportunity for creating that compromises. Well, not sacrifices, but when the two people's needs are not aligned, and especially when two people's desires or needs are opposite in their direction. That is tough. When we think about sustainability in our marriages, we want to think about sacrifice. Another element of the phase of sustainability that runs the entire gambit of the lifespan of the marriage, you are always in a phase where sustainability matters in your marriage. It is an underlying kind of foundational phase every day, every week, every month, every year, each pair of years, each decade, and beyond. All of them require sustainability, and all of them greatly benefit from kind of intentional pursuing of that kind of sacrificial, sustainable model. Some of the things that we've gone over in the past, positive investments that make the sustainability run throughout the season is some of them are cultural, right? So some cultural notes in the season of sustainability, or the phase of sustainability. First would be the appreciation. The more that you can call out and identify and acknowledge and verbalize anything that you could possibly appreciate about your spouse, anything that they did at the house, a meal that they cooked, a thoughtful gesture that they made, remembering your birthday. Becca recently did that for me. That was pretty cool. Any of the things that you can do to call out and appreciate whatever your partner is up to, those are good things that should be represented in the culture regularly calling that out. We are the kind of people that whenever we see something positive, we call it out. Number two in this area of kind of positive investments would be the affection. 8 non-sexual affectionate touches throughout the day, every day. Again, this is a sustainability thing. It's a phase of sustainability. So in the honeymoon phase, that's pretty easy. In the disillusionment phase, it's a little more difficult. In the teamwork phase, it's also quite difficult. In the disruption phase, it becomes very difficult. And so underlying all of that is this phase of sustainability. That's why it's so important. And that's kind of why we started where we started with the podcast. That and Becca quit doing the year by year thing. So we probably would have done that if she wanted to do more. I did have her scheduled for tonight, honestly. Real talk. I did have her scheduled for tonight, but she's having a baby soon. My baby, in fact, very soon. And so she gets a pass. She has made many, 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 many sacrifices in the areas of carrying our children. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's a wonderful thing. And we're so excited to meet kind of our new addition. So she's made incredible sacrifices in all those areas. And I'm so grateful for that. And I made sure to let her know that tonight, even though, it didn't work out for us to record year 5. We will eventually. I'm pretty sure. So affection is important in all the phases. And that's why the sustainability phase runs concurrently under all the phases of your marriage. Sustainability is something you need to keep in mind. Intimacy is really, it's pretty important. It's like sometimes in marriage counseling, I find that intimacy becomes incredibly important to some people. And then other times it's not as important. It's always important, but it's more of a cultural thing in a marriage. By that, I mean, if you are in a marriage where the culture is intimate, you are going to find intimacy. If you're in a culture of a marriage that is sustainable and you're investing into it, you're making these positive investments of time and kindness and thoughtfulness, and you're celebrating your partner and they're seeing and hearing and understanding and knowing you, and you're doing that for them, you're going to find intimacy, like a good amount of it, plenty of it. You know what I mean? Because those are the things that create intimacy. And if they're not creating intimacy, usually that's a sign that something is awry. There's a physical thing, there's a mental health thing, there's a historical thing, there's something going on that needs to be looked at, which is not that the marriage system is broken, but that there's something that needs to be addressed in the intimacy area, which is fine. Like that's super common. And honestly, there's just a lot of, there's a good amount that needs to be addressed within that, that going and receiving the correct amount of individual help to address whatever issue there was in that, and taking care of yourself so that that part of your relationship can thrive is another part of sustainability and sacrifice, because there's sacrifices in making sure that that intimacy is happening. Intimacy is a cultural dynamic because intimacy runs the gambit of the phases. It is a very present thing in the honeymoon phase. We have a story about that. We're not going to tell it. It's a great story. There's intimacy that runs underneath the disillusionment phase. You need to be finding and sacrificing and engaging and enjoying intimacy in that season. Anyways, in the teamwork phase, lots of that. Disruption, it's tough. When you're in the disillusionment, teamwork, disruption phase, a lot of these positive investments, these sacrificial things, the sustainable things that are going to keep you going, they just get harder. They get much harder. And that's why it's important to keep sustainability in mind as the ultimate phase. The ultimate phase. Ooh, I like that. That's a good little phrase. Number 4 I have here on positive investments is the shuka. A long time ago, and I couldn't even find it the last time I was looking for it, so I don't know. I think I called it emotional intimacy, but I wanted to call it shuka, like the shuka model for marriage. I don't know how great the podcast actual episode, but the idea around it is good. The idea is SHUKA, the Shuka model of emotional intimacy, when I am seen, when I am heard, when I am understood, and when I'm known, I am close to you. When I'm feeling unseen, when I'm feeling unheard, when I'm feeling misunderstood, when I'm feeling unknown, I do not feel close to you. So the intimacy is basically connected to the amount of positive investment that we're making into the marriage and how those investments are impacting the marital relationship. The fifth positive element, investment, is celebration. I put that down. I thought celebration was really important. Anniversaries and birthdays. Becca recently did this for me, and I guess I recently did this in the anniversary bucket. Usually I take care of anniversaries, which I do very much enjoy. But she really celebrated my birthday in a remarkable fashion this year. It was a surprise. It was everything that I love, and I was really blessed by it. Really, really, really blessed by it. So she kind of crushed the celebration this year, and it makes a big difference. That positive investment, the time and the energy and the thoughtfulness and the organization and everything that she did in order to make that day a special thing was a huge investment in me and in our marriage. And it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in intimacy. It makes a difference in feeling seen and heard and understood and known, appreciated and affectioned, all the things. So it was really a wonderful thing. And finally, I literally wrote down kindness and thoughtfulness. One theme that I find that comes out in marriage counseling a lot is the idea of a lack of thoughtfulness, a lack of insight or thoughtfulness. Now, sometimes that is normal because there is maybe some like conflict that's not happening that needs to be happening, or there's not repair that needs to be happening that isn't happening that needs to be happening, or there's something else going on in the culture, or the phase is really hard, like they're in a deep disruption phase with a mixture of disillusionment, and it just makes things hard. Ultimately, if you can be kind and thoughtful towards your spouse and just that, and just focus on being kind and being thoughtful over the course of your relationship, like that will get you pretty far. Now, it doesn't actually sustain the marriage just to be kind and thoughtful. That won't work forever unless there's a bunch of these other elements that also kind of undergird the marriage, because I have seen kind, thoughtful people fail in their marriages. I'm not thinking about anybody in particular, but I have seen, kind, thoughtful, wonderful people. Oftentimes, if kindness and thoughtfulness is being taken advantage of in a marriage, that obviously can make it unbalanced and lacking sacrifice and sustainability. Another thing that is really helpful over the course of a marriage is to orient yourself toward the future. So dreaming together, sharing goals, looking at the future, all of those things are really important and they're really helpful. And orienting yourself and your system around what we're doing and where we're going. In the honeymoon phase, that's important. In the disillusionment phase, that's important. In the teamwork phase and the disruption phase, you get the pattern. You've seen it. All of those things are really important when it comes to this sustainability phase. It starts with you, right? It starts with the honeymoon phase. It's all about you. Man, I love you so much. You're the best. You're the most wonderful. You're the most beautiful. It goes to me. Man, I'm not feeling it. This is hard. I'm not feeling it. You're less than the ideal. This is kind of what disillusion is. It's normal. Teamwork. Hey, here we go. Disruption. There them are. They are there and they are here and they're everywhere. Like one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, which is number 5's like favorite book right now. He is just, he just eats it up. And finally, we're back to you. Within the sustainability system, we focus on our partner. We focus on sacrifice. We focus on compromise. We focus on positive investments and future orientation. And we take good care of this other person. They are our focus. They are our person. And we're back to addressing marital issues, marital struggles, marital problems, and marital phases through the act of creating a marriage that is sustainable. So that's our episode for today. We hope you enjoyed it. Please shoot us an email. We're desperate for emails. Please go on to Apple and Spotify and write a glowing 5-star review. That would be super helpful. This is the end.
And I got all I need.